I don't think I've got any particular qualifications to be discussing the question of whether or not we've got soul, other than the fact that I've got one. But we'll have a go. I took the risk this morning of seeing what was in the newspapers to see if there was anything on this discussion. And everybody's favourite scientist, the mop-haired pop star Brian Cox, was in there saying that he reckons that it wouldn't be too difficult to build artificial intelligence. It's a bit difficult to read, but he said there's nothing special about human brains. They operate according to the laws of physics. In a sufficiently complex computer, I don't see any reason why you couldn't build artificial intelligence. And he went on to say that he'd been intrigued by the portrayal of human-computer relationships in the recent film Her, in which Scarlett Johansson plays a super-intelligent computer operating system. He said, I like the idea that we're staring at computers so much, we're becoming dehumanized. And actually, the computer is the most human character in the film. Now, I thought it was quite interesting. I mean, he's right. There's nothing special about brains, in a way. I think there probably is something special about human brains, or at least there's a possibility of this being something special about human brains. But I also thought it was interesting that he finds it easier to see the human in the machine than in the human, which speaks, I think, to a degree of contemporary estrangement we have from each other. People find it easier sometimes to communicate through mobile phones and tweets and texts and emails rather than talk to people. The other person I found in the newspaper this morning was Woody Allen. What he had to say, he was being interviewed, he's got a new movie out. He said his view on life, there is no God, there is no magic, there is nothing other than the cold, hard facts of what you see with your eyes. It begins, it ends, there is no reason for anything, and that's that. I think I'll probably just drop dead with my same lousy attitude, and that will be that. Well, unlike Cox, Allen has the advantage of having a sense of humour, so you may take this with a pinch of salt, his view that there's no God, no magic, what you see is what you get, and then you're dead. His films sort of give the lie to that, despite his comment that he doesn't care if they get burned. But if you take him literally, you end up with a sort of Richard Dawkins view of the world, in which we shouldn't tell children fairy tales about things like the soul because it will corrupt their otherwise rational minds. I didn't find Bart Simpson in the Times this morning, but there is a very famous episode in which he sells his soul. I don't know if people have ever seen this one. It has one of the best lines in all of The Simpsons, by the way, in which Lisa says to him, "Are you familiar with the works of Pablo Neruda?" And he says, "Yes, I am familiar with the works of Pablo Neruda," which on its own makes The Simpsons, I think. But in this particular episode, he said there's no such thing as soul. It's this sort of Richard Dawkins, Woody Allen view. It's just something they made to scare the kids, like the boogeyman or Michael Jackson. And in the episode, he goes and sells his soul for $5 to the kid next door, Milhouse. And then strange things start to happen. Automatic doors don't recognize him anymore and don't operate for him. He doesn't find anything funny. And animals, the cat and the dog, start to reject him. Now, luckily, I won't tell you what happens. You can watch the episode. But the love of his sister and his family gives him a way out in the end. Milhouse won't give him back his soul. There's something really rotten about Milhouse. Bart's view that the soul is just a myth made up to scare the kids, I think it's quite a popular view, today, that it's sort of representative of quite a powerful current in contemporary thinking that sees concepts of the soul or free will or even self-consciousness as being illusory, things that our body makes us believe but aren't really happening. One example of this is the often quoted experiments of the sort of neuropsychologist Benjamin Libet. He did a series of studies which show that, or purport to show, that you've decided, or your brain has decided what you're going to do before you become aware of your decision to do it. So he can see, apparently, a bunch of motor activity in neural pathways before the person reports themselves of having made a decision. And this is an often quoted, we can come back to it if you want to discuss it more, but it's often quoted sort of example of the view that free will is just an illusion. Now there's, some sort of truth in this view, if you like, because we don't get to do whatever we want in the world. We are subject to physical laws of cause and effect at the brain level. We do die. Woody Allen's right on that one. Bodies decay and we come to an end. The question is whether or not that's all there is. And it seems sometimes a very sort of rational and enlightened, scientific and modern point of view to say that's all there is. There are bodies that come to an end. We shouldn't be so excited about being human. It's not that special. It's no different from animals or even plants. And so, people assert this view and feel very sort of enlightened that they've dismissed religious fairy tales of the past, the idea of the soul. And I suppose it can be seen as a sort of manning up to the world. Yes, we are all alone in a cold, dark universe spinning towards eventual heat death. But we're rational, we can take it. We don't need false hopes. And carry on working through the bucket list or whatever it is that people do to give meaning to their otherwise empty lives. But it didn't always used to be this way. I think, to be really crude about it, I see some of the development through history of thinking about the soul and consciousness as one moving away progressively from an objective view of the world to one in which the subject, the human subject, and subjectivity becomes more important. In some ways that reflects our ability to do more in the world. We're less subject to natural determinations than people in the ancient world because we have fridge freezers and hairdryers. And that means that how I feel about things becomes maybe more important than the feeling in my tummy. I put a picture up here of Petrarch, the Renaissance poet and philosopher, theologian. He did something very remarkable in 1336. He climbed that mountain, which is Mont Ventoux in Provence. And he did it, so the story goes, for fun, which is not something you did in 1336. Only lunatics climbed mountains. It was very scary, and there were probably goblins at the top of them. He went up with his brother and met a shepherd on the way who said, "Oh, I went up there 50 years ago, mate, and all there was some branches and twigs. I wouldn't bother. It's a complete waste of time." He went up, the first mountain tourist, and looked out over Provence all the way to Marseille, an amazing view, and was really sort of shaken, and for a while sort of lorded it on the top of the mountain, saying, "I feel like the king of the castle." Then he was reminded, probably patting his pocket where he had a copy of the works of Augustine in his pocket, which is what you take when you climb to the top of mountains in 1336. He was reminded of his humanity and the need to look inside subjectively and not just out onto the objective world. And he read in his pocket edition of Augustine the following: "People are moved to wonder by mountain peaks, by vast waves of the sea, by broad waterfalls on rivers, by the all-embracing extent of the ocean, by the revolutions of the stars." People like Brian Cox. But in themselves, they are uninterested. And with that, he'd had enough of looking at the view out there and came back down to concentrate on looking inside himself. Da Vinci, picture of Christ, obviously. I've got this here as to counter this one, Dürer, self-portrait in similar position. there has been a very, high view of the self in the Renaissance, which sees man as almost, having divine abilities. Michelangelo painting God on the ceiling is creating both God and Adam. And the Renaissance man, in his immense self-pride, took a view of subjectivity being something that could encompass the world, which was at the same time opening up into a new world, of course, with the discovery of America. So I say that really just think that it's slightly ironic that it would be considered enlightened today to have a diminished view of subjectivity, a more rational view as opposed to these maybe religious or fantastical views of the past, when I think the idea of subjectivity needing to be taken down a peg is something that comes after the actual Enlightenment and informs more of a reaction in Romanticism or modernism, postmodernism even, to ideas that have been developed slowly, as I argue, crudely, to put man more at the center of things. So if we contrast three developing views of the soul, there's a classical conception in Plato and Aristotle, which really tries to answer the question, how is it that bodies move? We see bodies moving in space, and they knock onto each other and have they exist in chains of cause and effect. What causes that? Well, for Plato and Aristotle, there was something inside, some sort of life force, if you like, that could determine it. They use the word psyche, which becomes psychological in English. Soul is not a brilliant translation of this because it's more, for Aristotle, sort of a vital principle. But they are getting interested in what makes bodies animate. The religious perspective, starts to move towards the self-awareness that I was talking about in Petrarch. Augustine knows that he is an I because he is an I, and he knows that he is knowing. He's aware of his self-awareness, and there's no obstacle to that. He's fully self-aware, and I suppose that sort of makes sense. You can't be a bit self-aware. You know yourself, not how you behave in all circumstances, but when you say hello, Angus, in my head, there's no chance of me getting somebody else in there by mistake. Interestingly, Augustine as well has a concept, or makes an argument, that the mind or soul doesn't seem to exist in space. It's nowhere. You can't put your finger on it. It does extend through time. We have a concept of personal identity persisting through time, but not spatially. So whatever sort of substance it is, it's a bit different than physical ones. And with Aquinas, 900 years later in the 12th, 13th century, we have a concept that feeds into the Renaissance of man being a sort of halfway house, neither angel nor brute animal in this case, rather than devil, but with something a bit divine in his nature and something a bit material as well. And then the modern view, I suppose, really starts with Descartes, the famous cogito, I think, therefore I am. This is a revolution in thinking. This puts subjectivity first. Right? They're no longer trying to answer a problem that says the objective world is a given. Let's now explain subjectivity as a problem. They've turned it on its head. Subjectivity is the given. I think. That's the presupposition of everything else. Therefore, I am. So subjectivity determines objectivity, which is a massive step forward or away from some of the preceding thinking. And it's interestingly quite opposite to a lot of contemporary scientific thinking, which accepts the physical reality of the world as a given, and then sees consciousness as a problem to explain. But in this tradition that runs maybe as far as Sartre, and in its most radical form as far as Sartre, Kant is the big thinker here. Again, he says it's my thinking that structures reality. It's because I can think of concepts of time and space that they exist. I use them to give form to the world. I may not know physical reality in itself, but I can explain the human world and what things mean within it. And Sartre, as I call out there, took this maybe a step further to say, consciousness doesn't exist. There is nothing, but it comes into being, it emerges, because I choose to follow certain projects in the world. And through following those projects or ways of life, I constitute myself in the world. So my soul or my consciousness is nothing but something or someone, maybe more precisely, someone emerges because of what I do in the world. How are we doing for time? 20 minutes? Well, you say I'm fine. You don't know how much I'm going to go on for.
10 minutes.
So what we have in play then, or my argument would be, and I think we can recognize this, is that there are always two ways of looking at the world. A subjective perspective on it and an objective one. We can start from the subjective view of the world, and in which case the problem becomes the classical ones of skepticism. How do I know I'm not in a bathtub being deceived by an evil demon or hooked up in a vat and it's just a brain being bombarded with stimuli? Skepticism, idealism, or solipsism. I give up. I can't know anything more than myself. Or you can come at the world from an objective point of view, in which case the problem is how to find myself in it. The philosopher Thomas Nagel, who wrote a very brilliant essay called What Is It Like to Be a Bat, which you should read, also wrote a book called The View from Nowhere. And he makes an argument in there that let's imagine it's possible for science to create a completely comprehensive and objective account of the physical world, all of Woody Allen's cold hard facts. The question then is, where are you in that complete description of the world? Right? And more importantly, or more difficultly maybe, where is your perspective on the world in that complete physical account of the world? Where's my perspective? And where is the perspective of other people on it? Because if it's a complete account, it must include our view of how the world appears to us. But that's no longer a physical account. It's reached out to include something else in it. If it wants to be complete, it has to reach out to include a perspective, which is not part of the physical reality it's set out trying to determine. And so you get that problem, you always get moved one step back. And then another form of the problem is self-consciousness, because I can be aware of my self-thinking, and I can be aware of my self-thinking about my self-thinking about my self-thinking. Where do I find myself once you start going down that rather dizzying process of the self-thinking about the self? And I flag these things up just to start to raise a question or a feeling. Are we really comfortable with saying the self is a thing? That it's somewhere in the world and that an account of the world can find it in there? If it can find it, can it find the self that's thinking about itself in the world? What does that even mean? In short, the very existence of the phenomena of consciousness, the existence of points of view and different perspectives on the world, causes a problem for any account of physical reality that purports to be complete. But to put it another way, reality is not just objective reality. I think if you buy any of those arguments, you should feel open to the view that physical reality might be not all there is. That by no means is an argument for the existence of the soul. I'm going to argue, if anything, that the soul is nothing. But it's nothing more than physical reality. Nothing more is what it is. But that's the funny thing about it. But I'll hopefully come on to it. I don't think you can run away from yourself particularly easily. And it always remains a bit of a problem, is how can I account for how I feel to myself, my mental states, my raw feels, my intentional actions in the world. How can I reduce these scientifically, biologically, even psychologically or socially? How can I reduce them down to physical causes? You know, if I take 200, or so pounds of subatomic particles and put them in a big cocktail shaker, I'm not going to come up with me. I'm going to come up with 200 pounds worth of inert subatomic particles. What's the magic that gets added in when you put together, you know, bits of carbon to create a human being? What's that extra bit? As I say, I think it's nothing more, but it's something that emerges through being in the world somehow. Certainly there's a question to answer. About the soul that's not easily dismissed by saying there's nothing very special about the human brain, back to Brian Cox. I think there are difficult questions to answer. One is called epistemological privilege, first-person epistemological privilege. I know, standing here, that I have an ache in the back of my right thigh. I don't have to check. Don't have to reach down and prod it or get a microscope out or do a biopsy. I know that I have an ache in the back of my right thigh. You don't know this necessarily, and you probably would really struggle to find out. We know how difficult it would be to find out when you go to the GP with back pain. Right? You know you've got it. Can he find the cure for the source of the problem? No, never. But you know you've got it, and you can't be wrong about the fact that you know it. Now, you may not have anything wrong with your back. This is often the case. But you can't be in error in thinking that you have a sore back. That's not the sort of thing you could be wrong about. You just can't be wrong. And interestingly, this is the nothing more point about the soul. I know that I have an ache in the back of my right thigh, or calf actually. That's not because I'm wrong about it, by the way. That's just because I'm tired and can't remember the right word for the part of the anatomy involved. But calf is what it is. I can't be wrong about it, and I know that I'm right about it on the basis of no evidence whatsoever. I know. I don't have to check against anything. I think that's quite interesting as well when you compare this, you know, the idea of something or someone, a personality or a soul, emerging out of physical reality. It's an example, again, that the argument that there is nothing more than what there is not right, because I know some things about myself on the basis of no evidence. Self-consciousness, thinking about thinking, is a similar part of the problem, as is the question of freedom and responsibility. If I exist only in a physical world determined by the natural laws of cause and effect, then my freedom and responsibility seems to disappear. Either I'm determined by natural causes, or you might say psychological causes. I do it because my parents brought me up a certain way. Or economic causes. I do it because I'm a member of the exploited working class. You know, there are always some sort of excuses for why people behave. Or you grapple with the problem that it doesn't appear to us to be that way. We do believe that we have the ability to make choices, albeit within a limited operating framework. You know, you can't choose to fly, and we can't all choose to buy a big house in the Bahamas. Fine, we have constraints upon us. But within that, we make choices, and we seem to be free to do so, and we understand what it would mean for you to attack the person next to you in a fit of rage for bad reasons. Right? And when I say, why did you attack the person next to you in the middle of my lecture on the soul, and you gave me bad reasons, I think I would feel okay about holding you responsible for that outburst and criticizing you for it, and enjoining upon you not to do it again, or at least not until the end of the lecture. So that means that I accept a view of us as being both in the natural world, I'm subject to the pain of things dropping on my head, and I will die at some point. But I'm also I'm separate from the physical world. The I-ness of me and my ability to act in the world and take responsibility for what I do, and my ability to explain to you why I did what I did and you to criticize me, seems to operate at a different level than the billiard ball knocking it into another and moving it along. One way of looking at this, and this is an argument that Roger Scruton makes in a recent book of his lectures, is the two ways of talking about listening to the same piece of music. So we can listen to Beethoven's Third Piano Concerto simply as a series of pitched sounds, one after the other, each one identified with a different frequency. That's the scientific explanation. But if you give that account of a piece of music, it doesn't help you understand it, arguably at all. Understand it. Certainly, it doesn't help you like it or explain in any way what it's about. He contrasts that scientific explanation of sound with a path of understanding it, in which, these are his words, I don't know what you think, he calls it a kind of action in musical space, which we use a different form of descriptive language, one of a melody moving up through C to E flat and G down again. Well, both accounts are true, but both are incommensurable. They don't stack up. They don't reconcile. They talk about two different things. And as I say at the end, to put it another way, their sounds, the pitch sounds one after the other, each identified by a different frequency, is not all there is. Right? Back to the physical account of the world. That's not enough. There is something, again, there's nothing more there. And I think that's like the soul. If I give a complete physical account of my body, that's not all there is. Right? There's something else added on top. I'm going to flick quickly through the rest, because I can sense that I've sort of got the point across, not that you agree with it necessarily. But you know sort of where I'm going, I think. Self-portraiture I thought was interesting because it's a way, for two reasons. One, that it's about making the invisible visible. Right? It's a portrait of oneself. It's one's self-vision being made real in the world. Two, the actions or the creative powers of the artist are themselves, I think, a metaphor, if you like, for our ability to create out of nothing, to self-create a vision of the world, a perspective, to communicate something of how I feel about the world to you, maybe, or to offer it up to you, anyway, something that you might understand. There's something important about our concept of the artist that speaks to our self-conception of what it is to be human. I think that's what Dürer was driving at. Does anybody know what these are? There's something more. Van Gogh. This is Van Gogh, and this is his friend, Paul Gauguin. Gauguin. Never pronounce him. But they're not there, are they? But they are. Van Gogh has done himself with the lady's chair. He's put himself in the feminine role, no arms. This is a man's chair, carver. So you can sit back and put your arms down at the table. He's got his pipe to identify himself on it for Van Gogh. Gauguin has a book and a candle. Some argue that the book is sort of precariously balanced on the edge. It's about to fall off, which might suggest the sort of instability of their ongoing relationship. But, Van Gogh painted these self-portraits as a sort of a love letter. They were living together in a sort of colony of artists in Arles. And now that I've explained this, you can probably see them now, to a degree, but they're not there. The argument I'm hinting at there about our ability to create from nothing as an artist is, however, not the whole story. We are, to the extent we are artists, we're artists in a tradition. And there's a long tradition of self-portraiture. And anybody who's tried to do anything new in the arts, to write a novel or a poem or paint a picture, write an opera, will know how difficult it is to do anything new. It all seems to have been done before. So this is the version of Van Gogh and Gauguin done before, the Duke and Duchess of Urbino. The lady on the left, the man on the right. Colours are even similar. I don't know if it was a model for him, but there is certainly a long tradition of portraits representing that I-you relationship in which we look for each other in love or in friendship or in families. We look for that first-person perspective in you that is you, your you-ness. I try and get to it, and I know I never can. Even in erotic love, we use the metaphors of being as one, but it never really is, and it never really lasts. That's the problem. But we want it to. We want to transcend our physicality to the extent that we ever can. Now, I am running out of time, so I will throw up some different, more modern 20th century views of, I say the soul, they're all self-portraits. Andy Warhol in drag makes quite a good woman, but didn't like himself that much, I guess. Man Ray's view of himself as being assembled from bits and pieces. Francis Bacon, distorted self-vision, very 20th century. Jeff Koons and Alona, name starts with S, Spanish, Italian nude model and MP, only in Italy. That's their view of love, which maybe expresses something of a degraded view of the self and subjectivity compared to the Duke and the Duchess. But I guess maybe it's a matter of taste. But I think we may be less in love with ourselves as human beings at the beginning of the 21st century than we have been at some high points of history. And we'll skip that. I'll end on this, just that I do accept with Woody Allen that I won't be here if somebody destroys my brain or my physical apparatus to a certain extent, and that I will die and that'll be it. So I just want to take that literally for the sake of argument to kick off the discussion. My soul, if it exists, is nothing more than my brain. But if I was only my brain, I'd be a something, not a someone. And I'm pretty convinced I'm a someone, maybe not a somebody, but a someone, a not thing. If I'm a someone, I'm a not thing, I'm a nothing. And I'm kind of a bit with Sartre on this. Consciousness is not a mystery. The soul is not a mystery in here to be found, to try and locate it as Descartes did in the pineal gland. There's nothing in there, but that's sort of the point. It's that nothingness that means there's a possibility, however limited, of freedom. Because if you said that freedom is something, it stops being freedom. Right? You've tied it down, you've defined it. If you said the soul is the pineal gland, it stops being that nothing that we have or don't have inside. Obviously, these are metaphorical ways of talking. I'm not asserting that the soul really is nothing. That doesn't make sense. I just thought it's suggestive to take the idea literally that the soul is nothing more than the brain. And with that, I'll leave it.